Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Folashade. Please like, share and subscribe. Today I'll be showing you how to draft a shoulder dart bustier. Measurements we are going to be needing are the shoulder measurements, the chest line, the bust points, the bust pan, which is the nipple to nipple measurements, the shoulder to under bust, our waistline. The front waistline is 17, while the back waistline is 15, our bust circumference and our waist circumference. I already draw my starting line. Then to get the width of my rectangle, it will be my bust circumference divided by 2 plus 4 inches. My bust circumference is 44. When divided by 2 is 22. Then I'll be adding 4 inches to that. That's 26. Then I divided the measurements into 2. That will be for my front and for my back. So this will be my center front, while that will be my center back. The next thing I'll be doing now is to input my vertical measurements. The first one is my chest line, which is 9.5, my bust point, which is 11.5, my under bust, which is 14.5, and my front waist length, which is 17 inches. The only measurements we're putting on our back is the chest line and our back waist length, which is 15 inches. Then we are going to be connecting that with a straight ruler. Then we are going to label our lines. The first one is the shoulder line. Then our chest line. To get your chest line, you divide your armhole by 2. The next thing is our bust point. Next point on the bust. Then our front waist length. Then our back waist length. The next thing I did was to input my shoulder measurements. My shoulder is 16.5. When divided by 2 is 8.25. You are going to put that value on your shoulder line and on your chest line. Then you're going to connect the points with a straight ruler. The next thing I did was to input my neck width, which is 4 inches, and my neck depth is 4 inches. Then I'll connect that with a curved ruler. The next thing I'm going to do is to come down by 1 inch from my shoulder line to form my shoulder slant, and I'll connect that to my neck width. From the slanted line, I'll come down from there to my chest line, and I'll find the midpoint. Mine is 4.25. And I'll come in from that point by 0.75 inch. And I'll connect that with my armhole curve. That point is 0.75. The next thing I'm going to do is to input my bust pan measurements on my bust point and on my front waist length. Mine is 4.6. Then I'm going to connect that with a straight ruler. The next thing I'm going to do now is to come off by 1.5 inches from my bust point. Then I'll come down by 1.5 inches from my bust point. The reason why we are doing this is to avoid sharp edges around the bust points. You can use 1/4 inches if your bust is between 36 to 40, and you can use 1 inch if your bust is below 36 inches. The next thing I did was to come to my shoulder point, and I divided that into 2. Then I'll be connecting to that point. On the under bust line, measure and mark 1/4 inches on both sides of the bust pan. And on the waistline, measure and mark 1 inch on both sides of the bust pan. Then we are going to connect that. We'll connect the dots with the ruler. The next thing I'm going to do now is to blend my sharp edges with a curve. I'll just curve it like that. Be mindful of the way I'm making use of my armhole there. I'll blend the sharp edges with a curve. The next thing I did was to input my bust circumference divided by 4 on my chest line. Then I added 1 inch seam allowance, and on my waistline I input my waist measurement divided by 4 plus the 2 inches that's intake. Then I added 1 inch seam allowance. Then I connect the lines. That's my seam allowance. Remember, the difference between my front waist length and my back waist length is 2 inches. So I'll come down to my bust point line and I'll place the 2 inches there. Then I'll connect it to the bust points, just like that. That will be our bust dart. Then we'll move to the back now. The first thing I did on the back was to input half of my shoulder measurements on my shoulder line and on my chest line. Then I'll connect that. Then the width of my neckline is 4 inches and the depth is 1 inch. I'll connect that with a curved drill. The next thing I did was to come down 1 inch from the shoulder line to form my shoulder slant. Then from the shoulder slants, I'll measure half of what I have left there. Then I'll come in by 0.5. And I'll connect that with my armhole curve. That point is 0.5. So on my waistline, my back waistline, I'll come in by 1 inch from my center back. And when I will connect it to the chest line. The reason why we are doing this is to eliminate excess around the back, because our back is not straight, to avoid zipper bulge. The next thing I did was to input my bust span measurements on my waistline and on my chest line. Then I'll connect that with a straight ruler. On the waistline, I'll input ½ inch on both sides of my bust span line. Connect it to the chest line. The next thing I did was to input my bust circumference measurements on my chest line. And I added 1 inch for seam allowance. Remember, the slanted line is our new center back, so our waist measurement will be starting from there. We'll input our waist circumference divided by 4 plus 1 inch that's intake. Then we'll add 1 inch seam allowance to that. Then we'll connect the points. That will be our seam allowance there. So the next thing I'll do is to extend those lines so we can input our zipper allowance. So our zipper allowance is 1 inch, then 1 inch there. Remember, we have 1 inch there already there. So we are going to connect those points with a straight ruler. So that is our zipper allowance. That will be our zipper allowance there. So that's how we draft our shoulder dart bustier. The next thing we are going to do now is to cut out. So I'm separating my front from my back here before I start cutting. So I'm cutting the front now. Just like that. I'm going to cut the darts now. Just like, make sure you follow the curves, the way we blend them. Now cut through to the shoulder dart. Cut it through like that. And cut our neckline. before cutting the side. Then I'll slash my bust dart now. I won't be slashing that through. So then I'll place it on the bust point like that. Then I'll place with my masking tape on that. I'll be closing that with my masking tape, just like I'm doing here. So there will be a shortage around there. So the next thing I'll do is just to blend it to my chest line like that. Then I'll cut that out. Before cutting my armhole. Like this. So that's all for our front. This will be our center front. This will be our side front. So we'll be cutting out the back now. So we'll cut our zipper. We're cutting our neckline just like that. And cut our shoulder. Then we'll cut our armhole. Before cutting our sides now. Our side. So that's all for that. Allowance. That's our zipper. So if you want your back pattern to have a shoulder dart as well, all you have to do is to measure the midpoint of your shoulder and then connect to your chest line, like we did for the front. I won't be having a shoulder dart for mine. I'm just showing you how to do that. So this is the finished look of our shoulder dart bustier. So when you're about to cut on fabric, all you have to do is to add your allowance, half-inch allowance on the neckline, shoulder line, just like that. But our center front is on fold. Then just add half-inch allowance round. We already have our side seam allowance there. So add your half-inch allowance round like that. We already have our seam allowance and our zipper allowance